Good day, chess world. So thank you for watching in on this video. Once again, we're continuing the exploration of the wonderful book, Logical Chess, Move by Move. And we are now on game 5, which will be a great demonstration for you of how to translate central dominance and control into a successful kingside attack. In this game, we're going to see how white takes over the center with their pawns, steamrolls black out of the way, and then switches the attack to the king side. So you're both going to be learning how to successfully attack the king with that rule of 3 that we've seen in some of the earlier videos. And in this continuing one, how to successfully combine pawns and pieces to make weaknesses at the enemy king. So this one starts off with a king-pawn game. This is a game played in 1915. And now we get e4, e5, knight f3, knight moves to c6, bishop to c4. And fundamentally here, this is the beginning of the Italian. The idea is that the bishop aims at f7. If you want to see how black can handle this in some different ways, go look at video 1 and 2 in this series, where black had some very nice success in playing and handling the setup. So here, bishop c5, now they play c3. This is, of course, the beginning of the classical variation of the Italian game. And now after knight f6, he plays pawn to d4. This is, of course, the open variation, as they call it, because he's opening the center. And it's a very dangerous moment, actually, for black. Black has to be very careful because their center is about to collapse. They need a presence in the middle. This game is going to show you why, that you need pawns to give you space. So pawn captures d4, pawn takes, and now we see this is the reason why they played c3. And c3 was an interesting move because by playing pawn to c3, white was not aiding their development, but they were supporting the central advance and taking over the middle of the board. And as I said to you, this is a very dangerous moment because now black has no pawns in the center, not one single pawn. So they have to play precisely. Bishop b4 check. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, it's pretty much the only move. They have to play this check. And white now has a few ways to deal with this and plays now a very dangerous gambit, knight to c3. And why this is dangerous, of course, is because black now has to fight to open the middle, even though their king is there. The best path for black here, as we'll unpack in later games, is to take with their knight in the middle. But in this one, black underestimated their situation. And there are moments in chess where you have to calculate precisely and make correct decisions. And I think black in this game, not really sure of what they were scared of. As we'll see, it is very dangerous, knight takes, and there are some very interesting choices. But let's have a look. Why is castling here a bad move? They're getting their king out of the center. The middle of the board is quite open. So it seems like a very reasonable move. But actually, this is not good timing at all, because now white can use these center pawns to completely clear the path in front in this one. So we get this move d5, chasing the knight. And this is why you need your pawns to work together with your pieces to try and ensure that you get space. So after pawn to d5, the knight goes back to e7. Pawn to e5. The foot soldiers march forward for white here and completely remove the space, the enemy pieces. You are also seeing the power of a pawn. The weakness of the pawn is it's only worth 1 point. The strength of the pawn is it's only worth 1 point. So what it means here in this case is if the pawn attacks a piece, the piece must move because it's worth more. So we see the power of the pawns. This is what you want to do when we talk about a classical center. As we're seeing, you want these two connected pawns in the middle. And if you can, to get them to roll forward like this, this is wonderful. So the knight moves to e4. Okay. White now needs to solve this problem of their knight being threatened on c3. Fine. How do they do it? They solve the problem with development, queen c2. Remember that as a tip in your games. Whenever you've got a problem in the early part of the game, in the opening, try to identify the threat. What is the problem? Can I solve it while developing a new piece? So good, simple move by white. Now they are also threatening the knight on e4. So black plays knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, now again gaining time. Time is absolutely crucial. Bishop to c5. Okay, we can see white has a wonderful big space advantage. And this will help you in your game to understand what are we talking about with the space advantage. But as I said to you in the introduction, we're going to learn how do we use that dominance of the center, that wonderful space and control that black enjoys here to be successful. And the advantage of the space in the center is white's ability to switch sides. White can go from one side of the board to the other side very easily. And that's a big deal. So if we take notes, where do we want to target? What do we want to target? Well, they're king. They're king, if we look carefully. How many pieces does it have really defending it? Well, nothing almost. The rook holds f7, but as we've seen in previous examples, rooks are not great defenders. This knight is nearby, but it's not actively protecting squares. So we want to, as we've seen in the earlier videos, attack the weak squares in front of the opponent's king. And we want to make gaps, weaknesses. We want the pawns to move. So white begins with a very simple and direct knight to g5. Wonderful. Threatening mate. So black has to deal with this. Now let's unpack. If they were to play pawn to h6, it would solve nothing. Still checkmate. So you'll be surprised how people can make these simple mistakes. If they play pawn to g6, well, that is then the focus of holes. And we have seen this before. Immediately, we want to strike at this hole here because that is what we call an outpost. The knight would come back, aiming at the bishop, aiming at f6, and this would be such a dangerous position for them. And just an example, if we look at the game going forward, bishop to b6, the bishop comes in, occupying the hole. Remember, a hole is a square that the opponent's pawns cannot control. And now after rook e8, knight f6 check, wow, white is already winning material and can keep going with this wonderful attack in this case. So what a dangerous position. So in the game, black plays the more reasonable knight g6, keeping the pawns together, putting the knight in as a blocker. Well, we would like to get this knight out of the way. If we get the knight out of the way, we will have success. So what do? We will open that can, the can opener. We will push h4. Here comes Harry the h-pawn rushing into battle, and this leaves the opponent with a drastic problem because now we are threatening to push h5. So the opponent plays h6, and this is now a super creative plan that you can remember. White switches into what is called now the fishing pole trap. It's a kind of opening that you get, but it's all built on this idea of a rook sitting on this file. And we would actually like to open that file, get our own pawn out of the way. So just like us dangling some bait there, we could see that if black were to capture the knight, we would take back with a pawn, and this h file would be very valuable for us. So a sacrifice. But we know the rule of three. We need some more pieces, more weapons to help us attack. And that is white focusing on this bishop. How do we get the bishop in? Pawn to d6. What a wonderful move. Let's just unpack what is white threatening in this moment. What is white threatening? If black did nothing, if their king hopped on the square and said, I don't think you're threatening a thing. Well, I want you to think, put it in the comments, think for yourself, what is white threatening in this position? If white had the move, what would they do with it? Yes, they would play queen takes g6. What a brilliant move, because the bishop pins here and black's position would simply collapse. So here black says, well, I don't see a reason why I'm not going to take the knight. They take the knight. Pawn takes. This was our plan originally. We want the rook here. We continue with the threat of queen takes here, and the knight cannot move. So here, black has no space, and I want you to see this. how the black pieces are all trapped on the other side of the board and cannot come to the assistance of the black king side. Hugely important in this case. And I want you to see that where we use that space, look how the pawns have gone through the middle. This space matters. It's a huge detail. And those pawns have cut off the enemy. This is what you want to try in your games. This is also why you want to occupy the center with pawns. Use this to push the opponent out of the way. So now black tries to defend with rook e8. Wow. Okay. Doesn't stop our threat, but we can see we have too many weapons coming for their king position. So of course, we play queen takes g6. He finally destroys our center pawn, captures check. And here, white decides, well, I am in check. I could block the check. There are many wins here. White decides to move their king to f1, putting the king behind the pawns, since the rook has a wonderful job on this side of the board. And now, when the opponent plays queen e8, well, we need to be careful. They are threatening checkmate. So well done, at least to black, to get the threat in. But problem for black, it's white's move. How does white finish? What does white do? And well, we can see the very simple, remember as we discussed in the previous games, previous videos, take a look, follow the forcing moves. Checks, captures, simple threats. That should be the hierarchy of your calculation. Here, queen h7 check, king moves, queen to h8 is check and mate. What a wonderful victory. A spectacular quick win in 19 moves for white. What is the lesson? What can we learn from this? Well, number one, the importance of the fight for that center. Black lost this fight in the center. When this moment came round of the pawn overwhelming them in the center with these two pawns established, black here had three pieces in the game to only white's two. So they needed to use this moment to transform things. And they did not respect the danger that they need to fight against these two pawns. The best line here for black after the knight goes to c3, as we discussed, is to take on e4. But back then when this game was played, theory was not as clearly established because the knight capturing on e4 is risky, opening the middle while your king is there. But they needed to get a fight against these pawns and destroy white's center. When they castled, now we can see the pawns so effective, marauding through the middle of the board, trampling everything out of their way. And once they cleared this path, again, I want you to see white focusing on development. Suddenly, white has three pieces in the game. Black has three. White continued to develop with queen c2, and we see a wonderful development in this attack. Further, the other plan that's really good for you is to remember this idea of pawn to h4, preparing this attack where, yes, they wanted to play h5, but they ended up providing wonderful support for the knight and getting the rook to join in. So this game, I hope, will give you some wonderful ideas of how to control the center against opponents who don't put pawns in the middle and use that to push them out of the way. Once you have that central control and dominance, then you can switch sides. You can go from one side of the board to the other. And of course, the number one target is the king. Why? Because if we checkmate the king, we win the game. So please enjoy, go through this and some of the other ones, and we'll pick up in our next video on this wonderful series of logical chess.